Hey folks, it's Professor Coco here. And before we get into the major league project for this semester, which is the research paper, I thought a good introduction would be about how to integrate sources, because that's part of the process for this research paper. So let's chat a little bit about how to do that, and why to do that, and when to do that. So the very first question is, why do we even need to? Why aren't my ideas enough for a research paper? Well, the answer is because you're not really going to be able to provide specific evidence. You know you have yourself a claim that you want to prove, but in order to prove that claim and give it credence and weight, you need to have evidence, outside sources. Evidence bolsters your claim. It makes it stronger. It gives it weight. Statistics are a piece of evidence that's often used within research papers, correct? How many do this? What's the percentage of that? What has this research study shown? Expert witnesses are also a big help to you in bolstering your claim. What has Dr. So-and-so said about this? What has psychologist so-and-so said about this? What has the expert educator said about this? What has the historian found out about this particular event? So in short, in order to give more support, weight, and credence to your argument, outside sources are necessary. Okay, so now we know why we should be using them. How are they used? There are 3 different ways that outside sources are used. And of course, a lot of this is going to be familiar to you, but the refresher is worthwhile. You can use direct quotations, and we all know what that means. That means exactly word for word. You are pulling out that person's exact words. Excuse me. Another way to include outside sources is to paraphrase, correct? So that's somebody else's ideas, but you're basically rephrasing their ideas. And the last way is to summarize. And that's really very much sort of a hybrid of direct quoting and paraphrasing. You're shortening up what that particular person has said. But still, in all 3 cases, clearly in number 1, but in 2 and 3 as well, these are not your words, so you must give credit for them. Okay, you need to let the reader know, where are you stopping your thoughts and ideas, and where are you picking up on what someone else outside has said, thought, done, shared. So there are 3 basic steps for using outside sources. Whether you're quoting, paraphrasing, or summary, you always need to introduce. So then after you introduce the source, and we'll get into that in a minute, you need to embed the source into your material seamlessly so that the sentences flow well together. And that's done with either a signal phrase or even a signal word. Here's an example. A study by researchers in Boston University, introduction, found evidence that polar bear habitats were being reduced by 10% yearly. Aha, I see the found is in red. That is the signal phrase, in this case, a signal word. John Johnson claims, there you go with a signal word, that the melting of the polar ice caps will have polar bears fighting for breeding grounds. Found and claims are the signal words. So now the quote is introduced. It's been embedded. Can't we just stop it there? Answer, no. The most important part about using sources in your particular paper is for you to come in at the end and analyze the quote. And I use the acronym IEA for this whole concept. You introduce the quote, you embed the quote with a signal word or phrase, and importantly, you analyze it. In other words, that's where your brain power comes into play. So in using the former example, here we go. A study by researchers at Boston University. Introduction, people. The green is the introduction. Found evidence that, and you could consider that found evidence that is your signal phrase. Now we have a direct quote. Polar bear habitats were being reduced 10% yearly. Okay, now what's the red? The red is your analysis of that quote. Resources must be devoted to identifying the locations of current habitats in order to preserve remaining land for future bear population. So the green introduces the quote, the blue embeds the quote with the signal phrase, and the red is the extension, your meaning of that quote. So now here are some rules for the road. I always thought that this goes without saying, but I can't tell you how often this is not done properly. The material that you bring in really needs to match the topic that you're talking about. You can't force a quote just because you think that that's a dynamite researcher to have within your paper. It just doesn't work that way. So the quotes that you find, either the quotes, the paraphrases, or the summaries, any outside material, it has to fit well within the topic of that paragraph. All right? And of course, it needs to be introduced properly, correct? A lot of times a setup for a quote isn't just merely a phrase. You might have an introduction of several sentences before you get to any outside material whatsoever. So the embedding comes with signal words or phrases, right? And this is just a very partial list. There are countless others, but these are very typical ones that you would use within a research paper, particularly an argument paper. You can use says, claims, supports, proves, believes, thinks, shows. And you see the tense that these are all phrased in, correct? Opposes, maintains, counters, finds, denies, asserts, establishes. And any good reference work, rules for writers, there are worksheets in the Media Center, OWL at Purdue, our reference link, all of them have many, many resources for you. Just sample signal words and phrases, lists of them. And it depends on, obviously, the quote that you're going to use, correct? If you're trying to present an opposing viewpoint, opposes might work, correct? If you're trying to assert something, then claims is better. So really important, don't begin or end paragraphs, even a sentence, with a quote. Quotes need to be sandwiched. There are a few exceptions to this rule. One that comes to mind right away is many times people like to begin their argument, their paper, with a quote, and sometimes that's effective and that's acceptable. But as a general rule within the body of your paper, you really do not want to begin a paragraph or end a paragraph on a quote. Okay, now here's the deal with the analysis. Sometimes people get tripped up with this, right? Okay, I have this dynamite quote. I know it really fits well into my topic of this section of the paper. I'm just not sure how to use it, what to use it with, how to pair it up. Here's what you should think about when you're considering how to analyze a quote. The quote should answer any or all of these kinds of questions. How does this particular source and what you want to pull out that this source has said, how does it add to your argument? In what way does this further support a point that you need to make? Why do these facts and statistics matter to your argument? What does this study or example explain about your point. So consider those questions when you're trying to determine what to place in analysis. Now that we know the general rules, we all know also that what we're using in this class is MLA citations. And that means that within the paper itself, you need to establish in-text citations where they're required, and they should pair up or match with the works cited page that will be at the end of your paper. What goes in the parentheses, you may ask? This is much easier than you would think, okay? Here are basic options for what should be placed inside the parentheses. And remember, the parentheses goes after the quote or the paraphrase or the summary to let the reader know, hey guys, this is where these ideas, these words came from. Now, if you have an author name and you have a page number, both those things go in the quote, in the parentheses rather, excuse me. Exception. If the author has already been named in your introduction, you don't need to name them again. You've already signaled to your reader that this is Sota Sonia or this is Dr. So-and-so, or this is research psychologist XYZ, or this is Martin Luther King, etc. If you've introduced your quote by using that name, the name doesn't have to go in the parentheses, just the page number from the source material. If there is no author, the article title goes in quotes in the parentheses. And this is very often the case with internet sources. There's not a particular author named, but it's a credible article and you do want to use it. Then the article name goes in the quotes. Not necessarily the whole entire name. Sometimes you can abbreviate the most important words of the name. We'll get into that in more detail as we chat through MLA citations. When in doubt, the best thing to do is just be sure your introduction is very strong, okay? Even with an unnamed author, you could say that this is an article, this is a research study, these are statistics that were found in XYZ source book. And here's just another example with the color coding that I've done. The I is introducing the quote. The E is how to embed it so it seamlessly goes in. And the red is the analysis, okay, why this matters. We'll chat more about this, but that's a good overview for you guys.